I know we're like a teeny tiny bit past, but I still want to show you guys what I made for myself for Valentine's Day this year. And I made myself some fake chocolate magnets. I made sure that all of the ones that I had made would fit within these little baking cups. I did have a somewhat different plan as to how I was going to actually put these on the fridge, but alas, I could not rack my brain about how to make that plan come to fruition. So instead I went with plan B, I guess. And that is just cutting out, or rather hole punching out each of the holes in the middle of these little cups so that I could fit just the magnet beneath them. These are detachable, but you definitely can glue these together if you want them to be one solid piece. Each one I started off with some aluminum foil to make them more lightweight, and then shaped the base shape and covered that with a thin piece of oven baked clay. There were a few more complicated ones, but the base shapes were mostly simplistic. As I finished off with one, I would press a magnet that I got in a pack from the dollar store, not fully, but just enough into the bottom of it that it would stick out a little bit but stay in place. I used various tools along the way to further shape and create lines in some of them, as well as making pieces to go into others, like this little piece I made a coffee bean that I would later add on to the base shape. Alongside some tools, I also used my hands for a smoother kind of progression of the line, so it didn't have really a demarcation line. For this one, I also added in a needle with a plastic balled end and took it out so it wouldn't melt when baked, but I could still place it back in and finish it off at the end. Of course, I needed to make one that was heart-shaped because Valentine's Day. A few of them I kind of made up along the way, but I wanted to emulate the cherry blossom candy for sure, or the cordial cherries. They go by many different names, but essentially the chocolates with the cherries and sweetened cherry juice around them. For the cherry itself, I used foil for the base once again and air dry clay wrapped around it. Then I shaped it a little bit, honestly kind of into like a butt shape for being real here. As well as the heart-shaped one, I also wanted to make a rose-shaped one. This was actually the only one I didn't start off by using aluminum foil. I just built straight onto the magnet, and I kind of built up the clay to almost look like a pawn almost. And then built around there with very thin pieces of clay that I actually tapered out the edges even further and wrapped them and wrapped them and wrapped them, making sure that each of them kind of had a little bit of movement near the top of it. And honestly, I could have gone a little less realistic because it kind of looked a little bit more like a real flower rather than a chocolate, but I digress. Once they were baked and I added the E6000 onto each of the magnets that I hadn't previously done, I kind of felt like I worked in like a Dairy Queen where they give you a blizzard and they kind of flip it over to make sure that it's actually a blizzard. But I flipped it over to make sure that the magnets were as secure as possible. But once baked, it was time for the paint job. For the base colors, I added either a darker brown as like a dark chocolate or like a cream base, like a colored chocolate. The darker ones needed multiple coats to them. And once the 2 coats or more were dry, I added on some more of the detailing, which is mostly just dry brushing on lighter tones and going back in with the darker tones once again. Ah! The heart, though, I did an overall red, as one does. And then I finished off the painting with a brown around the perimeter. Finally, to add more detailing to some, like the heart, I used a fabric puffy paint as a drizzle. I painted the coffee bean a dark brown. And once that was dry, I used it to make an indent in the not yet oven baked piece, so that the indent would actually exist once it was fully baked. For the seemingly simpler shapes, these spheres, I created one that is a dark brown, and then I would later add more detail onto that one, and for the other one I added a cream color on. Then a fabric paint drizzle once again on top. A dark brown for the cherried one. And though the air dry clay for the actual cherry was red, it wasn't the red I wanted, so I painted it on a few coats with a actual cherry red. I had been adding some of the magnets in as well as I went by using E6000 glue into the designated magnet holes and then pressing them in firmly. Once they were dry, they were quite easy to get out of the way. For the cross section one, which I know is not what that sounds like, but it's literally just crosses into the section. I added a cream color to the top and then a dark brown around the perimeter. Once again, and once the top had dried down, I watered down that same dark brown that I had previously used and let it sneak into all the crevices while I dabbed it away with a tissue. Then added a pink creamy tone to this one, as well as doing the detailing with a very light pink. Finally, the rose. I actually used alcohol paint for the top portion. You could probably get away with acrylic. I just like that the alcohol paint dried down a little bit faster. But for the bottom, it was a very, very watered down red. I wanted the bottom to be more of a wash rather than like a saturation, but I did really like how it looked to have the main saturation on the underside of the petals instead. For the finishing touches, I put on my PPE and mixed up some resin. I coated every one of these in the resin itself, but for some of them I also used the resin as almost like a glue, like with the one with the pin in it, to keep the pin in it. The coffee bean I added on afterwards, of course, and then the dark brown sphere, which I had previously ground some white oven baked clay that I had tried to use in another project but it didn't work out. So instead I crushed it up and sprinkled it on top of this one. With the last bit of resin I mixed in some of that same red alcohol paint that I had painted the rose with and added it into the cherry chocolate. Just a little bit at first, and then I dropped the cherry in and added some more around the walls and on top of the cherry itself. That is it for today's video. I do hope you guys enjoy. See you in my next one. Bye, guys.